I've thoroughly enjoyed this morning. Have you enjoyed it? Good, good. I want to say thank you to the speakers. I also want to say thank you to the staff. I don't know exactly where they are in the room, but they do a lot to make this happen, don't they? Anyway, thank you. Don't clap too loud. They're going to want the rest of the week off if you clap too loud, so we want to do that. I'm going to do something very risky. Are you ready for this? I'm going to put up the last slide I had up last year. Do you want to see how well our forecast came from? This could be scary, right? I wouldn't put it up there if it was too scary. Well, out of all these things, you can read through you want. I'm going to highlight two items. The first one, which should show up in red, there you go. Acceleration in manufacturing, 1.2%, will spill over to the services and retail sector. And that is exactly what happened. I'll show you later what the services and retail sector improved. That 1.2%, by the way, the manufacturing sector is on track to grow by 1.3%. I mean, that is pretty darn close. The second one I want to show you on there is total employment is expected to increase 1.3%, 3,800 jobs in 2012. This is a welcome relief, but minimal growth. I know some people doubted that, but do you know what it is on target to grow by? 1.2%, 3,300 jobs. That's not just, that's extremely close. For forecasting, that is extremely accurate. That's amazing. And the only reason why it's accurate is that way out team that stood up before. That way out team answers surveys, they give us insight. I meet with them to understand each segment of the economy. They're the ones that direct it to make sure that it's as close as it can be. So if you want to put the accuracy into something, it's your own business community that makes sure the forecast that we share each time comes out to be as close as it can be. Oh, oops, I went too far. You're already getting a sneak preview. All right, when I was talking about last year's economy, I said the economy wasn't that we were in the flu, that we were recovering from it, right? We had this recession fatigue that was hanging over this business economy. We were feeling pretty bad about ourselves, and I gave a little bit more optimism to move forward, right? Well, as I was thinking about this year, I was thinking about my son, actually, who just entered kindergarten. And in kindergarten, he learned about fire, the 3 ingredients for fire, which you just already saw, unfortunately. I gave you a sneak preview of it, right? That's heat, it's fuel, and it's oxygen. And so I'm going to show you those right here. So to have a fire, you have to have heat, right? For it to start and for it to continue. In a fire, if it's an electrical fire, you can actually just flip the switch and the whole fire will stop. You need to have fuel. And I've seen a forest fire. They put these things called a fire break. You knock down trees, you plow up the ground, and the fire will go all the way up to that point and then stop, right? Something we really don't need in Kansas. I have seen it in real life in Georgia, though. The third thing you need is oxygen to start and continue a fire. And when you think about oxygen, right? Have you ever done that trick, and there's a picture of it, you put a glass over a candle and poof, the fire will go out. Those are the 3 ingredients. If you're missing any of those 3 ingredients, you cannot have a fire, you cannot grow. So you're probably wondering why I'm using terminology from a kindergartner. But I think if you'll bear with me, I'm going to show you why. When I think of heat, I think of consumer demand. And if you look at consumer demand between 2008 to 2010, consumer demand wasn't there, and that was preventing the fire. You think about fuel, you think about the marketplace, businesses. We had bankruptcies, we had business deaths. That was preventing the fire. The third one, you think about environment. You think about oxygen. You think about the political environment. You think about the uncertainties. Out of the 3, this is the most constricting factor from growing forward, even today. So just as I did last year, I talked about some of the national things going on and how it related to the local economy. And then I went and did the state economy and kind of related. I'm going to do the same thing this year and use this theme, obviously. First one, consumer demand. Well, nationally, consumer demand increased this last year and in recent months. We can see, though, of that increase in retail spending, a lot of it was for necessities and because of oil prices going up. So what are the fundamentals behind the consumer? Is the demand there? Well, we had a brief comment about unemployment. The unemployment number that came out on Friday was really good. It said the labor force was improving, the job market was expanding, and unemployment nationally came down to 7.8%. Even if it gets revised back, and it likely will, you put that with private sector job growth this last year, that bodes well for consumers and consumer spending going forward. Personal income. Personal income nationally has actually been keeping up with inflation or just a little bit above it, not really getting additional disposable income, but keeping up with it. Savings rate. Now, this goes two ways. Unfortunately, savings rate has come down to 3.7%. That means consumers want to spend. But that also means we're going to be talking about this issue of the consumer next year. But it doesn't really matter, right? What happens is what consumers are doing now. And if you're a business, you need to plan for what they expect to do. The last thing I have on here is consumer confidence. Consumer confidence improved. The fundamental behind this is consumers said the outlook was better. I don't know if they realize it's a political election year and all the other negative news. Because of that, I think consumers are becoming much more tolerant to negative news. The reaction is very different than it was a year ago. So overall, if you were to kind of summarize what consumers are doing, I think consumer demand nationally is there, but it's going to be limited by unemployment and income growth. The next one, this is that fuel side. This is the marketplace. You look at bankruptcies. Year-over-year basis, bankruptcies has declined since 2010. Balance sheets are better today. Look at business bursts. Business bursts have increased since 2010. Matter of fact, business bursts are now outpacing business deaths. If you look over the last decade, when we were going to expansion, bursts were not outpacing deaths. It was the other way around. Loans, commercial industrial loans for large and mid-sized businesses have been improving this last year. It remains very tight for small businesses, which is a concern. GDP slowed to that 1.3%. Jim Glassman made a perspective that you really got to be kind of careful. There's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of revisions. And he also explained why it went down. And it's right. If you look at GDP, why did it go down? Government spending put it down. Inventories brought it down in this last estimate. But for it to really improve, we need the basic driver. You need more consumption to get GDP to go up a little higher. Overall, because of these factors, I think businesses are ready to go out and into the economy. The only problem that's holding businesses back is the very next category, the environment. The environment, the political uncertainty, and what's going on there. Now, there's a lot of negative news that we can talk about, the Euro debt crisis, the Eurozone, but I'm actually turn this a little bit. Don't mitigate it, but there's concern. Let me give you 5 reasons to not be as concerned. The first one is there is a compact now. Governments can only they have a maximum spending they can get to. That was a major hole in the union. The second one is Greek has already redid their debt, restructured their debt. The third is Italy and Spain have created economic reform. The fourth is there's now a European stability mechanism, which is another major problem with the union. The last, which is actually my most important factor, this is old news. We already know about this. Businesses have already hedged against the risks. They've already changed their balance sheets. They've already changed their deliveries. If anything, some people are expecting this way too conservative, and there's a lot more upside to the European market going forward. But there's still risk. Political uncertainties. I hope I'm not the first one to tell you, but this is a presidential election year. And with that, I don't think I need to say anything else, do I? I think you understand exactly what that might mean. Next on the list is QE3. So the Federal Reserve has implemented the QE3, put more liquidity into the market. The market reacted favorably from it. The question, and this is a little bit, Jim Glassman actually made a comment, and I have to really think about some of the comments he made there. But I've shared this several times. There's a lot of liquidity. The question is, how does that liquidity get soaked up as the economy recovers? This will not happen next year. It's clearly it won't happen next year. So we will revisit that in the future year. The fiscal cliff. Now, out of the fiscal cliff, some of this is going to be mitigated, depends on who gets elected. They're going to have their different twists on what they're going to do with the fiscal cliff. The part that really worries me is sequestration. We actually talked about this last year. We called it a little different. I said the super committee, and we also talked about automatic triggers. But the sequestration is something I'm really concerned about. Now, I've looked at a lot of studies, and most of them are not very good. The best study I saw had this perspective. First, it's not going to all happen at one time. The industry is already slowing. Defense side's already slowing. The direct jobs that would be created as is from the sequestration would be about 750,000 jobs. To put that in perspective, that will wipe out the last 7 months of growth in the U.S. economy. The total impact that was estimated was 2.1 million jobs. Now the comment is, if that happens, that will put the U.S. in recession. That would put us in recession. So people are asking, well, why aren't you including this? One, we don't want to speculate that much on this, and this has a whole variety of what would happen. And two, the obvious is we will go into recession. You need to watch this as we move forward. Watch as something happens. And if sequestration is not taken care of, that could affect us. But something even more concerning than sequestration and the recession is what it would do to the defense industry. Now, there's been some comments that because this industry is already slowing, doing this would actually dismantle our defense industry and put it at more risk than just going into recession. The BRIC, and this is the Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And it was brought up earlier. These are the developing countries. We like them because not only they're producing goods cheap, but they're also consuming. And out of these countries, Russia is doing well. The other ones have risk of recession because slowing GDP. And he actually pointed out, the comment I was going to make, they're going to be very dependent on both the euro and the US. And so I kind of mitigate a little bit of that uncertainty as we move forward. Overall, for the environment, I think this is almost like we have a glass over our economy. And have you ever seen a flame where it kind of flickers, right? It skitters a little bit, doesn't have all there. That's kind of where we're at. But let me give you a perspective. As soon as we get past November, and then we get past January, no matter the political outcome, there will be a new normal, won't there? You may not like the normal, you might have a different position, businesses might react differently, but uncertainties are removed, which I'll come back on again in a minute. The point is, there will be a movement forward no matter what, and a lot of these uncertainties will be mitigated. So what's happening in the breadbasket and air capital? Let's start again by the consumer demand. Retail spending. Taxable retail sales has increased at the state level and the Wichita area. A little bit more than I would expect with slow employment growth in the state and high unemployment here, but it's improving, showing there's demand there, right? Income is similar to that of the nation, increasing close to inflation, a little bit above. Not a lot of extra disposable income from it. Unemployment. Kansas is at 6.2%. Now, that actually might be close to our new normal, our new full employment. We don't know, but it'll probably come down a little bit less than that. But that's probably a pretty healthy unemployment level at the state level. Here, we're at 7.8%, still remaining high, which is not bode well for consumer demand in this area. Home values. Home values increased across the state and decreased a little bit here because of some of the layoffs and some of the people migrating out of this economy for other jobs. Farm income. Farm income, which is a little surprising here, is actually expected to have record highs nationally, 3.7% increase. That didn't happen here in Kansas because of the drought. Matter of fact, livestock producers were significantly affected because of the increased prices. Feed costs went up and eroded their profits. Now, for farmers in general, depending if you had farm insurance. If you had farm insurance, you did well. If you didn't, it was a struggle. So it was a little mixed across the state. Overall, I would characterize consumers in Kansas and here as weak but wanting to consume. And for the consumption and aggregate demand to increase, we need base industries across the state, and here in aviation has to improve before we get other wealth back in here to improve the consumption side. Marketplace, again, here's the heat, or this is the fuel side of this. Loans, if you look at the Kansas Department of Credit Unions, loans improved the first half of the year. If you look at the FDIC for Kansas, it actually had, in total loan values went down slightly, so a little bit mixed. Employment, again, across the state has increased across the state and for Wichita. And for commercial investment, if you haven't done this, I would really encourage you to open your bag, look at the review and forecast from the Martins Company. I read through it. It's some really good insight. And in that, they showed that the retail market and the multifamily market has done really well within Wichita. Other sectors were mixed, but had a lot of opportunity. A lot of that opportunity is because of liquidity and price and alternative investments, since there's some risk out there. Overall, when you talk about the marketplace, if you want to characterize it, I think businesses here are sitting on their hands. They're sitting on their hands because they're worried about uncertainties. They're worried about the Affordable Care Act. They're worried about some of these things that we're going to talk about in this next slide. The environment. Last year, the hot topic was energy. We were excited about it, and it has proved to be an excitement across the state, hasn't it? We've seen fracking, we've seen intent to drills, we've seen economic migrants come into the state, right? We've seen a lot happening. It will not, and it has not, come back to a previous peak employment in the energy sector. However, we have seen some direct jobs, we've seen some indirect jobs in this sector, and more importantly, we've seen land values go up. Since this sector was actually a declining sector for Kansas, this is actually a good alternative. We're creating new wealth across the state and in this area, fueling back our economy. It's bringing money back here, and that's a good thing. Changing political environment. Well, there's a theory. So the uncertainty reduction theory. And then there's one simple component. People hate uncertainty, is a little surprising, and will do anything to avoid uncertainty. Now, when you talk about the business environment, when you have uncertainty, you usually have risk. You also have larger rewards. And that generally works. However, when you have changing political environment, no matter how good the change might be, it makes businesses concerned because there's no way they can hedge against the competitor. It's very difficult to hedge against the competitor by doing that. Hawker, out of all the uncertainties about the oil environment, the Hawker one has created the most uncertainty within our local economy. Why? Well, this wasn't Chapter 7, this was a Chapter 11. They're just dealing with debt. But I think it made us feel how vulnerable the aviation sector is. It made the average business person here think, oh my goodness, during this recession has some vulnerable component to it. But let's look at the Hawker themselves. It's a great company with great products. They just had a whole lot of debt. I don't think this is a real problem with it. It was going to move forward. So there's that's what I want to say about that. So on Boeing, the Boeing blow hurt the pride of the air capital, and that is very clear, right? It hurt the pride of the air capital. I liked an article that was in the Eagle recently, and it had a couple comments. It said engineers were moving out. That's a bad thing. That creates uncertainty. If we don't have that skilled labor here, it gets difficult to hire or get new expansions here. However, it also said that machinists were not moving, no matter what the number or why they're staying because of pensions or wages. If you keep the backbone of one segment, the machinists, which is in high demand all over the United States, that bodes well for Wichita. As soon as there are opportunities, we can bring new employers, or we can get existing employers to absorb a special skill set that will fuel our economy. Overall, for the environment in Kansas and Wichita, I think it's a little bit different. I think this is at least temporary or already happened, and we can overcome this. If we can overcome the uncertainties at the national level, I think we can easily overcome the uncertainties here. Again, when you just like the fire, remember, if you remove any one of these ingredients, the economy is not going to grow. You're not going to have a fire. So we need to watch all of them. All right, we've asked businesses for 4 years now about the existing conditions within the market. We use different sectors, right? We have different people giving us input. And we ask them their concerns, their worries, what's on their minds. When you look globally, shown in blue, 2 years ago, they were worried about the U.S. competitive position. That has now dropped off the list. Today is Euro debt crisis, it's BRIC, and global demand. Nationally, shown in orange, it hasn't changed very much. The very top line, which is the most concern, is still the most concern, that federal debt, and rightfully so. Federal debt is expected to be 73% of GDP, going back to the highest point since 1950. We added fiscal cliff, and of course that came up to the spotlight. The other one I'll highlight is inflation. Inflation is a lot lower on this list, but it's because businesses locally know that inflation could be an issue down the road. Now we're looking at concerns and worries about our local economy. This has actually changed a lot over the few years. You can't see these, so let me tell you a few. The real estate market used to be a higher concern. Household demand was a higher concern, and availability of skilled labor was a higher concern. Today, it's state public policy and state and local government debt is what's concerning businesses here right now. Now, if you really look at these, I'm excited to see what will happen next year. Some of these uncertainties are likely to change. So next year, let's see what happens and see if we can, what is on the mind of businesses next year. All right, business conditions. We've asked companies, tell us your business conditions. Tell us about your finances and operating. And on the left side, you see price of inputs. The majority of businesses said that price of inputs has stayed the same over time. When you look at prices charged, I'm still surprised by this. The majority of businesses said that they have kept the prices they charge their consumers the same since 2008. Now notice that blue line on the right side. Almost 20% have actually said that they've increased prices to the consumer. The question is, what has that done to demand? So volume demanded, shown on the left side in the red says that volume demand had actually stayed somewhat the same this last year, and almost 30% said that volume demand increased. But the bottom line is the bottom line. And you look at profit margins went down. Matter of fact, the Wichita Area Outlook team said that this would happen. Do you remember I said it was going to be tight and this would happen? This is exactly what they knew. They knew this was going to happen. Profit margins went down for them. So what about the future? We talk about cost of inputs. The majority said cost of inputs are going to stay the same. There's really no inflationary pressures. I put the opposite just so you can see a different perspective. Prices that they charge their consumers, 29% said that they're going to increase the prices they charge the consumer, probably because profit margins were down, right? 29% also said they're going to increase employment over the next few months, an optimistic sign. Overall, when we asked them to characterize the economy, they said the economy will struggle with the expansion and will be subpar at or below the potential growth. Our Kansas economy, what are we expecting? We're expecting a 1.8% increase in employment across the state. This is not going to be even across the state. There are areas that are growing faster, like the Kansas City outlook is more positive. But this driving sectors, if you look at natural resources, you have some of that oil and gas that's driving it. Under goods producing, non-durable manufacturing is improving, and the service sector is improving across the state. This is again from not only Kansas City, but the Wichita economy, improving that sector. For the Wichita economy, look at the orange line, that services sector. Services sector was the largest employment growth that we had in our local economy so far this year. It was the biggest expansion. In there you have professional business services, healthcare, education, and leisure and hospitality. And the goods producing, it had a different mix of growth, and I'll break that out in a minute. Overall, for the Wichita economy, we're expecting it to grow by 1.7%, with the caveat of the sequestration, which you need to watch and change your budget depending on what goes forward on that. Goods producing, natural resources. Again, we've seen intent to drills across the state. We've seen intent to drills in this local area. You ask developers and real estate agents, and I've done a lot of that across the state, they're saying that people are coming into this market. However, the workers remain invisible to state data and local databases. We don't see them. Part of the reason is because these are temporary economic migrants from another state. They're coming in. Just because of that nature, because they're coming in, they have high wages, they're fueling the economy, they're likely to fuel retail and professional services over this next year. Aviation, there's already been a lot of conversation about aviation, so I'm going to limit some of my comments. The commercial aviation, by a lot of forecasters, is an up business cycle. There's a lot of demand. A huge component of that is the Asian market trying to have that demand, that consumption, and the middle income consumer really forcing that segment. Now, let me give you a perspective on this. Let's be cautious. Although there's very optimistic numbers about commercial aviation, don't expect that to materialize in any significant number of jobs, at least over this next year. I think some of that middle class income has to improve in China before any real commercial employment actually improves. Defense sector is already in a down cycle. They're in a down cycle because of changing domestic priorities. They're in a down cycle because of the withdrawal from Iraq and Iran, right? And I've talked to several analysts around here trying to what's going to happen to our defense sectors. And for the most part, the tanker, which is going through the Spirit, and a light aerial attack fleet will likely be intact within this down cycle because they're critical elements. Other contracts that we get might not have the same outcome. And I've asked and tried to get a better handle on this. And unfortunately, either it's too sensitive or some other reason, I cannot get a better handle on the other segments of defense contracts that we have here. General aviation, and I like the comments that he said, general aviation in general, and I've said this a couple times before, is that they are positioned for growth. They are positioned with products. The problem is businesses in the global and national economy are in a wait-and-see mode. They're in a wait-and-see mode because of the uncertainties. They're in a wait-and-see mode for the retaliation against the corporate CEO. This is a great, you look last week at the presidential debate, it got brought up again about aviation. And so businesses locally came to me and said they're worried about this retaliation to the corporate CEO. It doesn't really make sense because productivity and cost of them need to use business jets. There's efficiencies for it, but there's this retaliation, and because of that, there's a pushing down of what's going on in that sector. Now, I don't have this on here, but I want to give you a perspective of the different segments within aviation. Right? The Deloitte had a great study and showed the revenues by commercial and defense sectors. They had the OEM and the suppliers. The OEM revenue grew by 0.1%. The tier 1, 2, and 3 grew by 5, 11, and 29%. I looked at the list of companies they had on there. Some of those companies in the suppliers were headquartered here. Or they had presence here in this community. If you look at all the pressure within this sector, you look at all the hierarchy within the structure of the supply chain, something's about to happen, especially when you have significant revenues at the very bottom. Right? Something's going to happen within the aviation supply chain, and something that we need to watch and kind of think about as we move forward as an economy. Consumption. The upper middle income and the high income consumer, they're doing well. Just like last year, their consumption is sound. Their consumption is going to go forward. They're going to be out there. The middle income consumer, as I said last year, is cash strapped. They're still cash strapped this year. However, I was a little surprised by they forgot what happened during their session. They decreased savings, and they spent anyway during last December. Clearly, by the other information I shared with you, the middle-income consumer is going to do it again this year. So on that, I have in general, I think they're very tolerant to negative news now. They're going to be on par with last year, but they, and I would caution you, are still limited by the fundamentals of unemployment and income. Retail, I already told you retail taxable sales increases across the state in here. And we just said that the commercial retail sector has done really well, but we haven't seen that on the employment side. So really, I think employment is going to be catching up with retail sales. They're going to enhance the experiences, plus it's being fueled partly by the oil and gas sector. Transportation, I don't have any real significant insight on the transportation sector, but I do want to point out a significant milestone, a landmark that happened just recently. The groundbreaking of our new Mid-Continent Airport. I think that has a significant effect. That is a big change in our local economy. And as Southwest emerges or comes into this market, we need to watch them and support them and make sure this airport is successful as they go forward. Service sector, this again is the bright spot of our local economy. This is where the majority of the jobs have actually grown this last year. Information is in a down cycle. It's following a national trend. It should be at the trough, or if not soon. There's not a lot of jobs in this sector. I should say that NetApp, which we had good news this summer, is going to add 400 jobs to the sector over the next 5 years. Financial services is in a structural change. I said that last year. This year is not Dodd-Frank. This year is the Basel III capital requirements forcing on them, and the consumer finance regulation on this industry. So small and regional banks here are going to have pressure because of all the regulation that's going on there. I found this also interesting, some insight we got from our Way Out team. Although we have all this liquidity in the economy, we have all this cash, think about what's happening to the oil and gas sector. There is even more cash being flooded in because of property values and because of leases. There is cash coming into our banks. The problem is finding viable options for investment. So if you have an investment, go to your banks. This is one to turn it around. Come up with ideas, push it forward, and their capital is cheap right now. Professional services, this is where we had the most of the growth. And within professional services, it's the administrative side of the sector. The administrative side of the sector is really an outsourced component of professional services. It's an outsourced component of a lot of the businesses. There's temporary agencies, other administrative support sectors in there. This sector has done really well. Healthcare is following a national trend, and if you're a baby boomer, you're part of that, right? You're consuming more healthcare. I will make a comment, though, that no matter if the Health Care Act goes forward, it gets repealed, this sector is going to have a structural change in the future. This sector is ripe for productivity gains. This sector is going to change because of regulations. It's going to change. Some of that might happen in 2013, probably not. It's going to really hit us in 2014. It's something we need to think about. I've asked several people within the community to give us perspective. I got some great insight, but I'm not so sure we're ready to really get that out yet. Maybe through this year we'll do an update on this sector and really try to expose what might happen, especially in our economy, because we're a little bit different in our healthcare sector. Government. Well, there's no way to forecast government because they're political whims of elected officials. So in here we have fiscal cliff and sequestration. Obviously that will affect it. Something you might not be aware of, but is very important to us, is Fort McConnell. The Pentagon will announce the new formal training unit and operating base for the tanker at the end of the year. This is significant because the implementation will start in 2013 and 14. This is something that could be positive or negative to our economy, most likely positive, and we should watch this as we move forward. All right, general expectations. What do we have for next year? Again, consumers are weak, but they're wanting to consume. Savings rates coming down, confidence going up. Businesses will sit on their hands until after the election. The marketplace is set for recovery. They're set, balance sheets are good, liquidity's out there, cash is available pretty cheap, but the pace is dependent on the removal of uncertainties. Local businesses will deal with the new reality and plan accordingly. Think about the general business model. You're in there for profit, so even if you don't like the outcome, as long as you remove the uncertainty, or as long as you know what the expectation is, you're going to adjust accordingly. If it's healthcare, or whatever it is, you're going to move forward. Moderate growth will not occur until general aviation sees consistent positive signs. Consumers are more tolerant to negative news, but will be limited by high unemployment and low income. Labor market will improve, but employees will still struggle to match available skills. If you ever want me to come out, I've done several presentations just on the workforce issue within our market and some of the structural issues that we're dealing with Generation Y. I would love to come talk to you about it. Employment is expected to increase by 1.7%, 4,800 jobs in 2013. Again, this remains subpar from our potential growth. We could be growing faster, but it's just not going to happen. It's better than last year, but not a lot better. Thank you very much. Thank you.